an army of spiders, a Kryptonian with mental health issues, and yes, long hair. These were some of the ideas that the big screen was going to witness, but that unfortunately stayed in the scripts and in the dreams of the crew of the film. This is one of the stories where business won over art. We are talking about Superman Lives, the time when Nicolas Cage could not get to fly. In the mid-90s, the superhero film industry was not going through its best moments. It had just come from a very successful period where the films of the iconic Christopher Reeve as Superman and Michael Keaton as Batman. Also, films directed by the genius Tim Burton were bringing back a lot of money and recognition to production companies. But in the same way that superheroes fly very high, at some point, they have to land. Reeves' Superman had his film budgets reduced, causing them to lose quality and critical praise, leading to the resounding failure of Superman 4, the last stone on the Kryptonian's grave. And years later, Burton resigned from Warner Brothers because they were putting a lot of pressure on him so that his films were not so dark. So Burton's thoughts were, and yes, sorry to remind you guys, but Tim was right. How can anyone forget or forgive? The Bat Nipples. And slowly the box office and critical praise that the first Bat movies had was lost, and this added to the low sales of the comics. There were also the tragic accidents of Christopher Reeve, who ended up paralyzed by a fall from a horse, which meant no chance of being able to wear the cape again. The mid-90s were a very dark time for DC Comics. These issues led to the film rights to Kal-El being put up for sale, something that no one in the industry had paid attention to, except producer Jon Peters, producer of Batman, Batman Returns, and Rain Man. Jon Peters had already fallen in love with the character and had plans to discuss matters with Warner executives so that they would not let this opportunity fly away, pun intended. And indeed, he hit the nail on the head. Warner Brothers bought the film rights to the superhero, so now they had the opportunity to take Superman back to the top. Now all they needed was something that would catch the attention of fans to step into the movie theaters again. They needed a super event. An event that could reach the pages of comics and paralyze the entire world. The death of Superman. This event blew the minds of all comic book lovers and even non-lovers. Because hey, who didn't know Superman? This even spread even in the news media, triggering a peak of interest and popularity for the Man of Steel once again. And that is where Warner Brothers and Jon Peters saw the opportunity to bring him back to the movies. Having already the premise of something that could shake the ground of the audience, the death of a character as cultural popular as Superman, they began writing a script developed by Gregory Poirier, calling the film Superman Reborn. Meanwhile, at a different time and place, an executive producer was meeting with an up-and-coming director, Kevin Smith, to talk about a possible sequel to Beetlejuice. One thing led to another, causing the producer to mention the production of the new Superman movie. Smith, being a full-blown geek, got blown away, and it was this excitement and passion what made them give Smith the script to look over and to see what his opinion was. But nope, it wasn't very good. He didn't like it from the title to the rest of the plot. For him, this was something that a comic book fan wouldn't like, so several conversations were held with Warner Brothers to warn them that they were about to make a mess of it. So after several takes, they gave Smith the job of screenwriter for the movie. Sure enough, Smith's script replaced Poirier's starting with the name, naming the movie as what we know it today, Superman Lives. And now the animation needed to carry out this super project is activated. Only the brain of the operation was missing, the director. Enter Tim Burton. But here's the problem. If he had resigned from Warner Brothers after the Batman movies, why the hell would he come back? First of all, he was an expert in giving a twist to the plots, so the executives wanted him mainly for his vision and style. And to be fair, that was something very much needed at the time, since they wanted to get away from everything done in the previous Superman saga. Second, because Burton saw in Superman something that also happened with The Dark Knight. Both were misfits of society. They were people from other worlds. Mentally or physically, we had to adapt in order to save the day. So it was interesting to see how Tim Burton could give his twist to the story of the Kryptonian. So now, the film had a director. However, another problem was encountered along the way when Tim Burton and the producers rejected Smith's script for not connecting with their vision of the superhero. So they removed him from the team and brought in Wesley Strick, writer of Cape of Fear and Wolf. With things now selling in the right direction, they also managed to land the new face of Superman. This actor was in his golden years of the 90s, Nicolas Cage, with box office hits like Face Off, Con Air, The Rock, and many more notches to his belt. With all this creative talent coming together, it was looking like a meteor of hope slowly landing to Earth once again. But it was this dream team that witnessed the downfall of Superman's flight. Just as the inhabitants of Metropolis are terrorized by the evil plans of Lex Luthor and General Zod, the crew of Superman Lives was being terrorized by the actions of the production company. John Peters' constant supervisions were a nerve-wracking issue within the team. The producer would come to the studio with his children and ask them for their opinions on the workers' designs, maybe trying to get an honest opinion since kids have no filter. So any design or idea they didn't like, the idea was discarded, making Burton himself very uncomfortable. But despite the creative problem, the economic one was the real super threat to the project. Warner Brothers was going through a very bad streak with the release of the 90s. Not only with the superheroes, but the films that had big cast names like John Travolta, Dustin Hoffman, Samuel L. Jackson, and so on. These films also ended up being box office failures, forcing Warner Brothers to be conservative with its investments. So little by little, the executives' scissors were trimming the budget of the film that was being written by Strick. They ended up firing him because they were not able to pay for such an expensive story. Now enter Dan Gilroy, writer of Nightcrawlerland, Roman J. Israel Esquire. Dan Gilroy joins the Superman Lives crew in order to tell a more personal Superman story. But regardless of the approaches, a superhero movie without epic action sequences was going to be a nonsense for both the producers and the creative team. And unfortunately, Warner Brothers could not pay for those expensive scenes either. Combine all that bad economic phase with the expensive risk of Tim Burton's vision for Superman, which was never going to be the typical movie made for comic book fans, the producers were afraid that it would be another failure like the director's previous ones, such as Ed Wood or Mars Attacks, which despite having a crossover of renowned actors did not generate good results for the producers. Burton was seen as a roulette wheel, and it could be either perfectly fall into the black and be a victory for Superman, or fall into the red and be the movie by another confirmation of the death of the superhero. But as Peters said,
I think it would have either been laughed off the screen or a big hit. I think Tim Burton would have made a movie I would have been proud of.
And then the nightmare came true. Within 3 weeks to go before the project really took off, Superman Lives was officially canceled. So now when people looked up at the sky, they were only going to see birds and planes, because they weren't going to see Superman at any time soon. But, just for a moment, let's take a look at what stories were in the minds of the creative geniuses. The Poirier version. In this alternate universe where Smith hadn't claimed this script and Poirier was still holding the pen, there would have been the possibility of seeing Superman reborn. A story in which Clark, who has problems in his relationship with Lois, causing the Kryptonian to go to therapy, similar to the scene of Peter Parker going to the doctor in Spider-Man 2. This would focus on Clark battling with his problematic duality of living both lives. One is Earth's hero and the other just a regular guy. At John Peters' request, in one scene, Superman fights a giant scorpion spider and its large spider babies. There would be Brainiac, who is a collector of alien races, and brings to Earth an unstoppable monster called Doomsday, which is taken directly from the comic The Death of Superman. This monster would end the life of the Man of Steel, turning the world into a hopeless anarchy, where villains slowly take control of the police and the mayor's office. But there's still a glimmer of hope in the sky, as Superman is resurrected using a suit that emulates his powers, with which he defeats Brainiac and restores peace in Metropolis. As soon as he was given the freedom to write the story, Smith called his own work a fanfic, which used certain aspects of the previous script, but without touching on the sentimental theme so much.
It was kind of like the Batman TV show version of a Superman movie. Very campy.
This story, in addition to accommodating the views of the producers, such as the death of Superman and the giant spider, etc., takes the story of Brainiac being the main villain, but this time teaming up with Lex Luthor. His plan would be inevitable end in Superman's death, which would be very similar to Poirier's script. Superman would be weakened by Brainiac, who's doing this by hiding the sun, the source of the Kryptonians' energy, thus allowing Doomsday to easily kill a weakened Superman. However, despite Doomsday and Superman dying together, as the title of the film states, Superman lives, and so through a Kryptonian suit, the Eradicator, Superman will be able to defeat Brainiac. In this script, Superman had more charismatic and fresh air about him, some more similar to his attitude in the comics. The role was debated between Sean Penn and Ben Affleck. Jack Nicholson would possibly play Lex Luthor. Linda Fiorentino would play Lois Lane, Jason Lee would be Brainiac, and Jason Mewes would be Jimmy Olsen. Adding this with a mind-blowing event, perhaps a cameo by Michael Keaton's Batman, in which he would mourn Metropolis for the loss of its defender. That would be the first time that Bruce Wayne and Kal-El would share credits in a film. Now the Tim Burton vision. Tim wanted to show a more maladjusted version of the character of Clark Kent, an alien who tries to get along with humans, showing his darkest moments, something similar to the Batman of 1989. And that's when they call Cage, someone who has not been seen as a leading man, but as an actor with an imposing and mysterious presence, just like Michael Keaton in his casting of the Bat. By including Nicolas Cage's ability to show a great difference between Clark Kent's image and Superman's, he really managed to make them seem like two different people. Cage was going to wear a suit with already defined muscles, and in the costume test, he had the famous long hair. So he experimented with different hairstyles. Little known to fans, Superman once even grew his hair long in the comics. Once again, Brainiac would be the main villain, represented as a kind of Grim Reaper who could transform into a human, being played by the iconic Christopher Walken. His ship would be a gigantic mechanical skull with its zoo of aliens destined to terrorize Earth. The idea was considered that Brainiac would physically merge with Lex Luthor, who was to be played by Oscar winner Kevin Spacey. There had been talks of Sandra Bullock and Courtney Cox playing Lois Lane, and the comedian Chris Rock would play Daily Planet's photographer Jimmy Olsen. Now how about Gilroy and Burton's vision? Gilroy and Burton had the difficult task of continuing the work done by Strick, adding several important scenes to the plot, including the death of Superman. However, Gilroy would include Superman's martial conflict with Lois, the problems they would have as a human-alien couple, increasing Superman's maladjustment with Earth in the film. Doomsday would be a kaiju-style monster, full of constantly changing faces, and during Superman's final battle against him, his face would change to those loved by Superman: Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, etc. This would psychologically destroy the Man of Steel, who would also be physically devastated by the huge monster until the moment of his shocking death. Superman's funeral would be inspired by the funeral of Princess Diana of Wales, a blow to the heart of the world's population. Similarly, this would be the blow to the population of Metropolis. But let's come back to our real universe, and its fans wanted a Superman Returns. The desire to bring the man with the cape back to the big screen was not over yet, and they tried it in the early 2000s with a project called Superman Flyby, directed by Brett Rayner. But problems with the casting and John Peters led to this film being the Phantom Zone. Years went by, 2004 came, and Bryan Singer, a director who had great success with superheroes due to the X-Men saga, was offered the direction of the new Superman film. This would be a continuation of the stories of Christopher Reeve's Superman. Being a nostalgic reboot with the classic suit and the classic story, the film was indeed released under the name Superman Returns and was successful to a point, but not as expected given the name that it came with this brand, leaving the last son of Krypton's takeoff halfway.
It's known the Superman. It's known. It's as known as Jesus Christ. Everybody knows Superman.
Fast forward to recent years. Nowadays, figures like Spider-Man, Batman, and Iron Man may be more popular among children, and they may have more sales as Halloween costumes. Superman has not had the best of luck on the big screen at times, but what he has not failed at is his staying in popular culture. Since his creation in 1938, billions of people know about his myth, feeling him as something of their own, like another companion. There is less than a year left until we have the new opportunity for Kal-El to sweep the theaters with Superman Legacy. And despite several turbulent years in his storylines, let us not forget that he's still recognized as one of the greatest superheroes ever created, and his brand can always be depended on. What are your thoughts? Drop a comment on this video, hit the subscribe button, and tell us what movies or series you'd like us to dive into next. This channel is produced by movie fans for movie fans.